9 years after my mother told me I wasn't her daughter anymore. She rang my doorbell. I watched her through the glass before I opened it. She was holding a leather folder against her chest like it was something fragile. She didn't hug me. She didn't apologize. She said, "We need your signature." There was a deadline. 72 hours before the bank closed on a refinance tied to property that still, technically, had my name on it. My name is Iris Archer. I'm 33 years old, and 9 years ago, my family erased me from marrying the man I loved. She stood on my porch like the last decade had been a scheduling conflict. Calm voice, careful posture, urgent eyes. She didn't know I had already read the clause. She didn't know that one line in that contract made everything different. She thought she needed my forgiveness. What she actually needed was my consent. She had 72 hours, I had 9 years. Before all of this, we were the kind of family people pointed to as proof that things worked. We lived in a quiet subdivision where every lawn was trimmed to the same height and every mailbox matched. My father handled numbers. My mother handled impressions. My brother and I learned early which one mattered more. Sunday dinners were non-negotiable. Roast chicken, polished silver, linen napkins, even when it was just the four of us. After dessert, my mother would pause in the hallway, straightening frames along what she called our legacy wall, stretched from the entryway to the kitchen, school portraits, piano recitals, honor roll certificates, vacations staged in coordinated outfits, every milestone documented, centered, evenly spaced. She believed photographs were evidence of success. There was never a speech about expectations, no formal rulebook, just comments about good families, solid backgrounds, and the importance of marrying someone who reflected well on us. It wasn't said with cruelty. It was said like common sense. I brought Daniel to Sunday dinner in early spring. He arrived with a bottle of wine and a patience I didn't yet understand he would need. He was steady, composed, careful with his words. He asked my father about the market. He complimented my mother's cooking without overdoing it. My mother smiled the entire evening. It was the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She asked polite questions about his work, his parents, where he'd grown up. Then she asked about cultural differences. The phrase wrapped in softness like it wasn't sharp. She said she worried about how hard things might be for me. She said families sometimes struggle when backgrounds don't align. Daniel answered calmly. I watched him absorb it. 3 days later, I stopped by the house to pick up a package. That's when I noticed my graduation photo had been moved from the center of the hallway wall to the narrow stretch near the laundry room. It was subtle. It was deliberate. And it was the first time I understood I was being That summer, my parents hosted their annual 4th of July barbecue. Neighbors filled the backyard. My mother wore a bright linen dress and moved through the crowd, like a curator guiding guests through an exhibit. When Daniel and I stepped onto the patio, she hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Then she smiled and said, "This is Iris's friend, Daniel. Friend." The word landed softly but carried weight. Daniel shook hands anyway. My father focused on the grill, turning burgers that didn't need turning. Later, my aunt pulled me aside near the drink table. Her voice was low, almost apologetic. "Your mom is worried what people will think," she said. "You know how she is." As the fireworks started, Daniel squeezed my hand and I told my parents we were engaged. The air didn't change. No applause. No congratulations. Just silence stretching longer than it should have. In that moment, I understood I had been publicly downgraded. I didn't have to guess what was happening. A week after the barbecue, I stopped by unannounced to return a serving dish. My mother was in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. Unaware I'd stepped inside. "She's making a mistake that will cost her this family," she said. Her voice low but steady. I won't stand there and pretend it's acceptable. I stood in the hallway, staring at the photo wall, listening to my future being negotiated like a liability. 2 days later, the email arrived. Subject line: family expectations moving forward. "We love you," it began. Then, plainly, "if you choose this path, we will not financially support or attend the wedding." There was a paragraph about tradition, another about reputation, a final line about consequences of adult decisions. It wasn't emotional. It was procedural. And that's when the power shift became explicit. They weren't reacting. We were married on a Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. No aisle, no string quartet. Just fluorescent lighting and a judge who mispronounced Daniel's last name before correcting himself. I didn't mind. The room felt honest. My brother didn't come. He sent a short message about being caught in the middle. My parents sent nothing at all until that evening, when my phone lit up with a single text from my mother. You've made your choice. No anger, no pleading. Just a line drawn. I stood in our small apartment later that night and filled out the paperwork to legally change my last name. Archer became part of my history, not my present. On my keychain, I still carried the brass house key from my childhood home. I'd never taken it off. I turned it in my hand for a long moment, then slipped it free and placed it in a drawer. Metal against wood. That was the first thing I let go of that didn't come back. Silence became the new tradition. Birthdays passed without cards. Holidays arrived without invitations. When our son was born, Daniel held my hand in the hospital room while I stared at my phone, half expecting it to light up. It never did. My parents learned about their grandson through a cousin's social media post. They didn't call. We built our life without them. Daniel advanced at his firm. I finished my certification and started consulting independently. We bought a modest home in a neighborhood my mother would have described as up and coming, which really meant diverse. We paid our own down payment. Every milestone felt earned, not staged. Through distant relatives, I heard fragments about my parents' business. Most of their wealth was tied to a cluster of real estate. Investments structured under a family trust my grandfather had established years ago. Several of the properties carried adjustable rate loans. Interest rates rose. One of those loans was approaching its balloon payment deadline. Refinancing would require restructuring the trust, and restructuring the trust required every beneficiary's consent, including mine. The clock didn't start when my mother knocked on my door. It had started months earlier. When I opened the door that afternoon, my mother's eyes moved past me before they met mine. She took in the street, the neighboring houses, the bicycles left on lawns. Assessment first, emotion later. Inside, she stepped carefully across our entryway rug, her gaze drifting to the wall opposite the staircase. We had our own version of a photo display there, not symmetrical, not curated, just moments. Daniel holding our son at the beach, our courthouse wedding portrait in a simple oak frame, birthday candles, school plays. She paused at the wedding photo. We need to put the past behind us, she said finally, for the sake of the family. Then she opened the leather folder, one of the investment properties my grandfather had placed in the trust years ago originally, structured as a tax strategy for my college fund still listed me as a beneficiary. To refinance before the balloon payment came due, the trust had to be amended. They needed my signature. Suddenly, I wasn't erased. I was required. After she left the folder on my dining table, I waited until evening to open it. Daniel sat across from me while I read every page slowly. The way my father had once taught me to read contracts line by line, not headline by headline. The trust documents were older than I remembered. My grandfather's signature dated back more than a decade. An amendment had added my name as a 25% beneficiary when the college investment property was transferred into the larger real estate portfolio. Buried in Section 8.4 was the clause my mother was counting on me not noticing. Any refinancing, restructuring, or reassignment of trust-held property required unanimous written consent from all listed beneficiaries. Unanimous. Without my signature, the bank could not proceed. Without refinancing, the adjustable rate loan would hit its balloon payment in 72 hours, triggering penalties and potential foreclosure proceedings. This wasn't retaliation. It was arithmetic. The contract hadn't changed. The power dynamics had. The next morning, I called an attorney recommended by a colleague. I forwarded the trust documents and asked one question. What happens if I don't sign? We met that afternoon in a quiet office with glass walls and neutral carpeting. He reviewed the clause, nodded once, and explained my options without theatrics. If I consented, the trust could be restructured and the property refinanced under new terms. If I withheld consent, Section 8.4 allowed any beneficiary to petition for a forced sale of the asset in order to satisfy outstanding obligations. The property would be liquidated, debts paid, and remaining equity distributed proportionally. 25% to me? The sale would strip my parents of control over one of their primary income-generating assets. It wasn't a punishment. It was a mechanism built into the original agreement to prevent unilateral decisions. I left the office with copies of the paperwork and a clear understanding of the numbers. For the first time in 9 years, the leverage was mine. My mother returned the following evening, her posture tight with expectation. The folder was already open when she sat at my dining table, a pen placed neatly beside the signature tab. "I knew you'd understand," she said. "This protects all of us." I folded my hands and slid a different document across the table section. 8.4 highlighted in yellow. "I won't be signing," I told her. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Her composure cracked almost immediately. She accused me of holding a grudge, of trying to humiliate them, of tearing apart what little was left of the family. The words came faster than her breathing. I waited until she finished. "You removed me from this family 9 years ago," I said. "This is just math." At midnight, the 72-hour deadline expired, without unanimous consent. The bank denied the restructuring request and initiated proceedings tied to the forced sale clause. There was no argument left after that, only consequences. The property sold 3 months later. Market conditions weren't generous, and after debts and fees were settled, the remaining equity was thinner than my parents had expected. My 25% arrived as a wire transfer on a quiet Tuesday morning. I used part of it to pay down our mortgage and placed the rest into a college fund for our son. My parents downsized within the year. The large house with the symmetrical lawn went on the market soon after. My brother sent a long message accusing me of destroying stability, of choosing pride over family. I read it once and didn't respond. A week later, my aunt texted 3 words: "I understand, Iris." My mother never apologized. She never acknowledged the email, the silence, the ultimatum. But she never asked me for anything again either. The leverage was gone. So was the illusion. What remained was clean. Sometimes, I think about that hallway in my childhood home, the perfectly aligned frames, the careful spacing, the way my mother believed placement determined value. I understand now that being moved to the edge wasn't about a photograph. It was about control. In our house, the walls aren't symmetrical. The frames don't match. Our wedding portrait hangs slightly lower than it should. Our son's drawings are taped beside it. No one is curated. No one is repositioned. If you've ever been erased for loving the wrong person, you know the quiet grief of that shift. You also know the strength it takes to stop asking to be centered. Justice, for me, wasn't loud. It wasn't revenge. It was documented, notarized, and filed. My mother had 72 hours. I had already built a life.